Along with the simplicity of the mouse click programming, you're also able to just write English language coding with our easy programming language. To make programming even simpler, there's a lot of guiding that happens along the way. So as you're writing or as you're using your mouse to click on choices, there's times where you're guided what the valid choices are in completing your lines of code. So that makes it more foolproof. And then you also have error recognition in the case that you might make a choice that presents some risk to your programming. iCON will tell you. And in the case where you've made an illegal choice, it will definitely let you know not only that there is a legal line of code, but it will take you right to that line of code in your program so that you can fix it quickly. Okay, so looking at the hardware first, and then we'll be looking at the programming software a little bit, is, as I mentioned before, all of the interfaces have integrated control in them. So while that may not cover all applications, and there's a lot of scenarios where you could wind up with just a single touch panel to control a project. In turn, our controller, which we'll look at in detail in a moment, has integrated interfaces in it. So that means I can serve my user interface out of my controller to a multitude of interface types, not just our proprietary panels, but you can also use things like Android to display your user interface. So for touch panels, we've got wall mount and tabletop touch panels we'll look at in a moment. We have a tactile keypad, and amongst all these different devices, you'll find some of them with a number of different connectivity types that will be detailed on the next slides that include LAN or infrared, relay control, RS-232, 485, and digital I/O. So we'll see that in a moment. And then the integrated development environment, as we mentioned before, simple, readable language coding. One thing I haven't mentioned yet, and I am now, is that you do have the option to program in Java, which is one of the top 5 programming languages in the world. So if you do have somebody who knows Java, it'll be easy for them. But we also offer conversion of our easy language into Java, and that has some useful aspects to it we'll talk about. All right, designing your user interface is quite simple. I'm sure some of you have done user interface design on other brands of control automation where at least as simple as that or simpler. That element of control automation is pretty well refined amongst the different brands. So it's not going to be difficult for you to transition from another brand to iCON. And finally, our driver database. This is also quite simplified. It's easy to import and export drivers from iCON. So if you build one in your lab or PureLink builds one for you, it's easy to import it. And if you need to send a driver that you make to a colleague or someone else remotely, that's also very simple to do as well. Okay, so first up, as we look at each piece of hardware, we're going to look at the T4W. Now the T4W is a 4-inch touch panel, completely programmable. We're showing a sample program on the screen here, but of course you can design anything any way you want on that, what we call canvas, to make sense for your application. And this fits in a standard US 2-gang enclosure, and it's powered from PoE 802.3 AF, and in fact it only uses about half of that power. So it's a very low power device. So the T4W allows control of devices over LAN. So if you have a source or display or switch or another device that has control by network port, then the T4W can handle that. The RS-485 port, that obviously handles things like cameras quite easily. That's pretty common, a product that uses 485. But we also provide you with a RS-485 to 232 converter so that you can control a 232 device from that port as well. All right, something we'll cover again as we get to the iCON CA controller, which you may not know what that is yet. But as we mentioned, all of the touch panels have built-in controllers. But if you choose to use the C8 as your controller, then you can set the T4W as just the user interface. So you switch it into terminal mode is what we call it. And then the C8 takes on the responsibility of being the controller, and the T4W is the user interface only for that controller. And this will become more clear why when we get to that slide. Okay, next up is our K10D. This is a 10-button tactile keypad with rotary push button dial on it. And we offer you a number of inserts, quite a few different ones actually, that you can place on these buttons. But of course, this type of design has been going on for decades. So if you have other inserts you want, you can simply put those in, make your own, or put your own in. All right, so this again is 2-gang US enclosure powered via 802.3 AF. Again, using only about half of that standard. And the K10D offers a few control connection types. We've got 2 RS-232 COM ports, 2 relay ports, an infrared, and digital I/O. And you'll notice that you have the option of local power if for any reason you want to do that, but very commonly people use this powered off the network switch, and there's really no issues doing that. Okay, so this also can become a user interface off of the C8 controller as well. All right, so moving on, now we've got our 10-inch touch panel. This one is tabletop. You see the kickstand on here, but other than that, it's very related to the T4W as in terms of its connectivity. It has LAN and RS-485 on board, and we also supply you with the converter to use it for 232, and it has the built-in controller. So if the devices you are trying to control are either LAN or 485 or 232, you have everything you need here. If not, then you can use the C8 and turn the T10 into a user interface only. Okay, the T10W is a wall mount version. Other than that, is identical to the T10 in every way. It just doesn't have a kickstand, and we do provide you with the gang box to mount this into the wall. So it is a non-standard gang box, but it will fit within the typical distance of wall studs quite easily, because it's only horizontally probably about 9 or so inches wide. So it's fine to fit in between studs. So other than that, the specs are the same. It's got a built-in controller, can be set to terminal mode to work as the interface for a C8. One thing we haven't covered yet, which we're just about to get to, is that there is an expander that will work with any of the touch panels or controllers that you've seen so far, the E4. So we're going to take a look at that next. Okay, so we've been mentioning the C8. So we call this the master controller. As you can see, it's loaded with control connections, COM ports. It's got 8 of those, 8 infrared, 8 relays, 8 digital I/O. And of course, it has a LAN port, so it can control anything via LAN. So it's got a great deal of connectivity. So when you choose this product, you would need a user interface for it. So then I have options to use any of the ones that I've shown you, along with standard OS tablets, for example, to view the user interface that is programmed into the C8. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. Another thing to be aware of is, we've mentioned having only one touch panel in a system, but it is absolutely possible to have multiple touch panels when you work with the C8, because I can create different user interfaces for every touch panel in my system. So if I've got 50 different touch panels in a building all tied back to the C8, I can have 50 completely different user interfaces on those touch panels, or I could have all the same. So it's completely flexible that way. All right, so the last piece of hardware we're going to look at is the E4. So the purpose of the E4 is only to provide COM or relay port expansion to your iCON system. And because it connects to the network by LAN, I can put a E4 anywhere I need it to be. So if I've got a conference room and I have another conference room and maybe a breakout room or a lobby, I can put E4s in all of these locations to be used as control expansion in those locations. I can have as many E4s as I have IP addresses available on the network, and it works as an expander for any of the other hardware we've looked at. So the T4W, K10D, the T10, T10W, or C8 all use the E4 as a connectivity expander. Okay, so that completes the hardware. We're going to take an overview look at the software. So what you're seeing right now is a screenshot of the EZcontrol programming environment, and in particular, it's the tab where you do 99% of your work, which is create the user interface and write the code, quote unquote. So what you're mostly doing is mouse clicking, but this is where that work is done. So some things to note is that in that screenshot on the right, the upper left window is my page management section, and I have 3 different page types that I can utilize. One is pages, which are typically the entire canvas area of your touch panel. And you can have different pages, and they can be triggered by the user, they can be triggered by schedule, or they can be triggered by conditions. So there's any possibility of changing the page layout. And then I have subpages, and subpages are typically used when you only want to change a segment of the entire canvas area. So maybe when you select between audio or video sources, you have different selection buttons that appear for audio versus video, and you would change the subpage. So that's what the user would see as just part of the touch panel changing. And then you have pop-up windows, and pop-up windows again can be triggered either by the user, manual button press, to be triggered by a scheduled event. Maybe at a certain time of day you want a message to appear, or it can be triggered by a conditional event. For example, you lose communications with one of the devices you're trying to control, so a pop-up window appears saying unable to communicate with a device. You can also have password protected screens, so if you don't want somebody getting into a certain part of the user interface, they have to enter a password. You can have hidden buttons that open pages that you don't want somebody necessarily knowing are there. So you have everything you need to navigate pages. In the lower left, you have components and templates. And components are essentially all the different things you would put on the canvas. So you have buttons and sliders and text boxes and graphic image holders. So everything you need to create the user interface exists in the component area, and all of those can be modified. So as you may have noticed in some of the previous slides, you see input buttons over here. Well, those are graphics that we took a typical button and converted the way it looked, so it was more intuitive to the user. So that's very easy to do. When you come in here and you pick a button, you just change its type to an image, and then you put whatever image you want on it. So it's very easy to design that way. Lots of different parameters you can adjust on the different components. Now, templates are also extremely powerful because they allow me to create commonly reused sections that I can quickly put in a project. So for example, if we go back and we look at on the bottom here, we have lighting controls. That is a template that was imported and used many times in many different projects. And you may just change the colors or make minor changes, but this allows you to one time create commonly reusable user interfaces and just instantaneously pull them into a project. So it makes building your user interface very quick. And you can have as many templates as you want, and you can export templates to your colleagues, or they can send you their templates, and you can just share templates and just improve your workflow. All right, so obviously the top middle is the canvas. This is where I place things to the user interface. To the right of that is the parameters of any currently selected component. So if I select a button, the settings for that button will appear on the right, or if I pick a container, it'll context sensitive change to show me the correct parameters for each of the different types of components. All right, below the canvas window, you'll see sort of to the left, we've got UI events, system events, and driver events. When you all get your demo systems and come to the training classes on actually how to program all this, you'll be in here and you'll be building events that are either driven by the user pressing a button, or by timers or schedulers, or by conditional events. So it's very quick and easy to create this, and you can clone events. So it makes it fast. If you have something that is fairly repetitive, like for example, creating a, set a video switch to input 1 button and set video switch to input 2 button, those are going to have almost the exact same code, other than one is saying set input 1 and one saying set input 2. So if you just clone those and make one minor change, you're really speeding up your coding. Then on the bottom right, you'll see in this orange box, this is actually an example of the easy language code. And you can see it's in English. It just says call the feature, which is send a string to PS610. That's one of our switchers, a 6x1 switch. And then it shows what that string is that's going out. So it's very readable. And then there's a command below that. That's really a programmer's debug, which is print to the local console a message. So when this button gets pressed, if I've got in my lab, I'm working on my programming and I'm testing things, and I press the button in my console, I'll get a response. And we'll look at that. Over on the left, you see a little example of Java code, and you see it's not really that frightening. It is different than easy coding, because easy coding is mouse clicks. But when you do write in Java, iCON actually starts auto-filling for you to help you. And it also constrains you to legal selections so that you'll be more efficient and quick. So we'll look at that in a minute as well. All right, so this is a little more deeper example. We had talked about there's really three things that happen in programming. You've got manual events, which is the user pressing a button in most cases. You have temporal events, which is something happens at a certain time. And you have conditional events, which is the condition must be met and then something happens. And that's what we're looking at here. Is you'll see in easy language, there's a condition saying if there's a return string coming into the control system that contains HDMI1, then change the state of buttons on the screen so they reflect to the user what the actual state is. This entire conditional statement is created with mouse clicks. So it takes very little time and effort to do that. And so what this code is doing is if somebody changes the switch to HDMI1 and it's not even with the touch panel, maybe they're at the switch and they press HDMI1 on the switch, iCON will receive the update through the commands from that switch and then update the touch panel to show the true current state of the switch. So that's an important thing for it to do. All right, this is showing the option to code in Java. And this is also a conditional statement. So this may look a little more scary to you, but it's something that iCON actually helps you with. And I'm going to show you that in a second. There's occasions where you might prefer to write in Java, so you can do the same thing either way. So it's really a choice. Do you want to write it in easy or Java? All right, so we talked about the easy graphics creation. That's referenced here in a little more detail. Now you see sliders and the switches and so on. We explained the presets I mentioned to you here. We've got an audio control preset that we placed on the user interface. So you just double click on audio controls and drop it where you want on the screen. These are the adjustment parameters for components. This one in particular is a toggle button, and it shows you all the things that you can do to adjust that toggle button. And this is the project management page. You spend really all of 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes in this page, because it's where you just set up your program. You bring in your device drivers and you can organize them into different folders, and then you can import or export drivers in the database on the right. And in the middle is technical information about each of the drivers. So as you click on each driver, it'll tell you details about what port in the control system is connected to, if it's a LAN device, what is the IP address and the virtual port number it's communicating on. If it's RS-232, it'll show you the baud rate information, and all that can be adjusted quickly here. So it's basically a one-time setup page. That's the very first thing you do, and then you spend the rest of your time in iCON. So we're going to just take a quick look at iCON. This is just a project that I started putting together, but we can start a new project here. So we'll create a new project, and we'll call this 1114 webinar demo. Okay, and what I'll do is I'll search on the network for available iCON controllers. And if you look in the bottom here in my console, it found an iCON T10, and F058 is the last 4 of the MAC address. So I'll select that. It's my iCON T10. And then I just have to place it in a folder. So I'll put that in my iCON projects folder, and we'll just call it 1114 webinar demo. Okay, so that's how I start a project. I find my controller on the network, assign that, and here we'll add a PS610. That's a 6x1 switcher that I've got on my network, and I think it's actually at this address. So I'll set the address, port number. We're communicating over LAN, so we'll see it's connected by LAN. And for the most part, I'm done in this page. So like I promised you, it doesn't take long. If I have a lot of other things to put in here, I just add them to the project, right? And set their IP address, and that's it. So now I move on to UI Designer, and in here I'll create a new design, and this will be a T10 touch panel. So I'm naming it T10, and I'm selecting the T10 touch panel. And so you see these pages pop up, and of course I need at least one page, so I'm going to create a main page. So there's my page, and now I can come to my templates, and I can drop templates on here. So notice it looks very much like the one in my example. I think that might be all I've got from that, but you see how quickly I was able to do that. Here, I'll go ahead and ungroup these, and I'm going to name this one button input 1. And just for the sake of time, I'll just do a couple of them. All right, so when I do those, now I'm just going to create a button event called select input 1. All right, now I'm just using my mouse. I'm going to create a new event, which is call the device driver of the PS610 and send a string saying set input 1 carriage return, and that's it. I've programmed that button. Now remember I said it's faster to clone for input 2, so I'll just clone this event, and I'll say input 2, and I can copy and paste this in here, and then I just change this to 2. Now I've got 2 of my buttons programmed. All right, when the system starts up, I want it to connect to my switch. So I'll say call driver PS10 connect. I did that all with my mouse. All right, so panel starts up, it opens a connection to the PS610, and that's that. All right, so far we've programmed this to switch inputs 1 and 2 on the PS610. And now maybe I want to do something with the feedback from the switch. So in this case, I'll say on message, which means whenever I get a response back from the PS610. So here we'll do a condition, and we'll say if return string contains HDMI 1, then I want to, and I'm just mouse clicking right now, I'm going to update input 1 button status active. So that way, if either I press the button on the touch panel or I press the button on the switch, when the switch says, hey, I'm set to HDMI 1, this button is going to change to its active state to indicate to the user that that is the currently selected input. Okay, so that's as deep as we're going to go today in this. We want just to give you a taste of how easy it is to program this. And then all I would really do past that is compile it. Oh, one thing I didn't do is assign the interface in my project. So I just did that. So when I do my compile, I get a build success. So now I just upload it to the panel and I have a working control system. So yes, it would take a little more time to program the rest of these buttons, but I think you can gauge from the speed that I programmed these two buttons that it wouldn't take me very long to get other buttons programmed. Okay, so getting back to our test drive program, what we highly encourage you to do is send in an evaluation request for our iCON controller. You can pick any one of them that you looked at today and get that in your shop, sign up for a one-on-one training, and when you get your device, we will work with you one-on-one on programming so that you can focus on the parts that are important to the applications that you do. All right, so please take advantage of this test drive program. It really will help you hands-on, get familiar with this and see that you can do anything that you can do with other more expensive, complicated, hard to program control systems. You can do the same things with iCON. Okay, so follow us on Facebook or LinkedIn, X, and so on. We have weekly updates. And if you go to our website, you can enter your email and then you'll be in our weekly e-blasts about the latest and greatest stuff going on with our catalog and services. All right, so that's it. Please take advantage of Test Drive so you can really experience the power of iCON. That's it for today. Thanks for your time, and we look forward to seeing you at future webinars. Thanks again.